Hey Cake Chums, and welcome back to another video. Now, in some rather exciting news, this week is my birthday. But thanks to the track and trace app, I'm actually in isolation for my birthday. So obviously the UK is currently in lockdown, so I clearly didn't have anything elaborate planned for my birthday, but being in isolation essentially means I literally can't even leave the house to go to work, school, or to go to the supermarket. As a result, I won't be making the array of baked goods that I would normally make for my colleagues at school, and I wasn't planning on making a cake for myself at home. I mean, do I eat cake very often? No. Do I need a whole cake for my birthday just for me and the husband? Also no. But then I got to thinking, I've got quite a few little bits and pieces knocking around in the studio that I've been meaning to use on a cake for a while, and I figured, let's just make a cake. So in today's video, I am going to be baking, assembling, decorating, you naming it. That makes no sense at all. But we're gonna make my birthday cake from start to finish right here on my channel. And so if you're somebody who has been wanting to have a go at making a birthday cake, but hasn't been brave enough to do it, or if you just fancy making a cake, or if you just fancy watching me make a cake, then this is the video for you. So I guess we better get down to it. Let's get to the video. Okay, so I was planning on starting this video by showing how easy it is to get hold of certain ingredients online by using a service like Deliveroo or Amazon Prime Now, because obviously a lot of these services these days will go to the shop for you and drop things off if you're stuck at home. Unfortunately, we don't have any delivery people working at the moment, so there's no option to have anything delivered. And Amazon Prime Now doesn't have any slots all day. So fortunately, because it's only me that needs to isolate at the moment, my husband is able to leave the house, so I've decided to just send him out instead. So he's gone to get me the ingredients that I need, and while he's doing that, I thought I'd just tell you about the sort of cake I'm thinking I'm going to make. So as I'm sure I've said in previous videos, one of my favourite types of cake is lemon cake. So I'm thinking I'm going to do a lemon sponge with a kind of light lemon buttercream, and then we'll do some sort of blueberry filling, because lemon and blueberry is always a good combination. And then decoration wise, I'm thinking buttercream with a watercolour kind of effect with the two-tone. And then decoration wise, I've got a few bits and pieces that I've, as I said, got knocking around in the studio, or I've had knocking around in the studio for a while. And also I might have ordered a couple of bits yesterday for next day delivery, which hopefully will be here by the time we're ready to use them, including some toppers from Amazon, which I'll show you when they're here, and also some macarons, because while macarons are fantastic to make, if I'd done those in this video too, we probably still would be filming in about 20 hours time. So when they get here, we'll have a bit of a taste test. Hopefully they'll be fantastic. I'm sure they will. I've heard good things about this place that I got them from, and then we'll use them on the cake as well. We're also going to throw some chocolate drip on it, because I've talked about this on the blog before, but I don't think I've ever used it here on YouTube, and it's fantastic stuff, so we'll get that out. I've got some sprinkles, plus some other sprinkly bit. Basically, essentially, we're going to throw everything at this cake, and hopefully make something really beautiful. But yeah, so I'm going to pause here, wait for my ingredients to arrive, and then we'll get baking. Now, if you've watched my previous videos where we've baked cakes, there may well be some repetition in this one, and for that I do apologise. But if you've never watched one of my videos before, then this is very much going to give you a very quick kind of overview of how I essentially make most of my cakes. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is grease and line my cake tins, and I'm using 3 7-inch PME seamless cake tins. I like to use PME cake release spray to do my greasing. This one has seen better days, but it still does the job. So much quicker. And then I've even got some pre-cut 7-inch rounds of greaseproof paper as well. It's not laziness, it's efficiency. Okay, they can then be put to the side and essentially forgotten about for a bit. And next up, it's time to make the cake itself. Now, we're cracking out the new Kenwood Titanium Patissiere XL. The box is gone now, so I can't read it anymore, but the new Kenwood mixer. If you missed last week's video, we did an unboxing of the new Kenwood Titanium Patissiere XL. I'm probably saying it wrong. But anyway, if you want to know more about the mixer, head to last week's video. I'll put a link up in the corner. And we're using the 7-litre bowl today because I'm going to do a 12 egg mix. So I usually allow 4 eggs for a 7-inch round cake. And the way I work out how much I need of all the other ingredients is to weigh my eggs. So my Kenwood mixer has got built-in scales. So I'm going to put the 5-litre bowl on, zero the scales, and then we're just literally going to pop our 12 eggs straight into the bowl, and it will tell me what they weigh. I'm doing that in the shells. Some people think you should weigh the eggs in the shells, some people say you should weigh the eggs not in the shells. I've always done it in the shells. Okay, and that weighs 806 grams, so I'm going to need 806 grams of all of my other ingredients. So that's 806 grams of butter, 806 grams of sugar, and 806 grams of flour. So for now we're going to take this off. We're going to pop the 7-litre bowl on. And I just say I'm so excited. I've never had a XL mixer before. So normally I'd be trying to make a mix this large in a regular 4.6-litre bowl, and no, not easy at all. Okay, so zero the scales again. And we're weighing out 809, let's say 810 grams of butter. Ridiculously huge knife, far bigger than we need. Now this butter has been sat out at room temperature for a good few hours, but it's always pretty cold here in the studio, so it's still quite hard. Never mind. Ideally you want your butter to be quite soft. But this is about as soft as we're going to get. Oh, by the way, I'm using Lurpak slightly salted butter. I always use Lurpak slightly salted butter in my baking. I find salted butter a bit too salty, but if you use unsalted butter, you then have to add your own salt to your recipe. So this kind of is like the best of both worlds. Obviously, normally this scale would be facing you, but I'm making this to camera, which is why I'm having to kind of peer around the mixer. It always confuses me now when I try and bake without filming it and can have the mixer the right way around. Close enough, 810 grams of butter. In with that straight away we're going to add in our 809 grams of sugar as well, so let's zero the scales again. And I'm just using regular white caster sugar. Okay. I'm using the Flexi Beater or the creaming beater, which is the one with those kind of rubbery silicone paddles down the side to scrape the bowl. And then we're going to start on a fairly slow speed and then we'll gradually build up. So let's start with min. Okay, if you notice there I hit the pause button rather than actually turning the speed down to off, which is why it stopped so quickly. Love that. So what we're looking for is that butter and sugar mixture to have gone really nice and light and fluffy, which it's looking like it's doing. And then the next thing is going to be to add the eggs. So what I'm going to do is let this run for a little bit longer while I crack all the eggs into a bowl, and then we can start adding them to the mix a little at a time. Okay, so that's looking beautifully light and fluffy and creamy. So, just going to break these egg yolks up. Look at the gorgeous colour of these eggs. Wow. By the way, I don't normally make a habit of essentially making cakes in, well, this, but again, I'm in isolation, so. Okay, so there's the eggs. I'm not going to add them just yet because I also want to prep the other next ingredient, which is going to be our lemon zest, because don't forget we're doing a lemon cake. I like to use real lemon zest for my lemon flavour rather than extracts. Although we will be using extract in the buttercream and I'll explain why later. So I have got unwaxed organic lemons. You want unwaxed because the wax covers the zest, so when you scrape it off you're essentially adding wax into your cake as well. So unwaxed, and then I'm just using a grater like this to take that zest off, ready to add to the cake. Okay, so that is the zest of 3 lemons. As a general rule, I'll use 1 lemon for each 4 eggs. So if I was doing, say, a multiple tier cake with like a 20 egg mix, then of course I would have 5 eggs. But for this, which is a 12 egg mix, we're just going to go for 3. So I'm going to add the zest into the butter and sugar. And then we're going to add our eggs a little at a time, allowing them to fully combine before we go with the next lot. Again, still on quite a low speed. I've got it on a number 3 at the moment. Number 1 because it stops it going everywhere, and number 2, it doesn't need to be any faster. Might even turn it down to a number 2. So we're just looking for those eggs to kind of emulsify with that butter mixture, and then we'll go in with a little bit more. If it looks like the mixture is starting to curdle, we're just going to add in a tablespoon or so of our flour, because that will kind of just bind everything back together again. Okay, now I'm actually going to pause it very quickly there because I want to weigh out my flour just in case it does start to separate, because as I say, it's quite cold in here and I don't want to run the risk of that happening. Fun fact, you can also weigh on the top of the mixer by simply swiping right on this menu. So if I 0 again and then put that bowl on top, can you see it's telling me the weight of the bowl? And I think that's because the actual scale sensory bit is in the feet, so anywhere on the bowl can be used. Okay, and we want 809 grams of self-raising flour. See, normally in my videos I have all the ingredients weighed out, ready to go, but let's be honest, who actually bakes like that at home? And there you go. I would say it's as simple as that, but having it facing away from me wasn't very simple. But again, if you have it facing you, it's very simple. So I'm just sieving that flour just to add some more air to the mix and make sure we've got no lumps. And then we can carry on with our mixing. Okay, and then I'm going to add in half of the flour-ish. And remember to turn that speed down before you turn it back on. I'm going to go right down to minimum, and I'm even going to throw this in as well, just to be on the safe side. Now the trick with the flour is to only mix until you can't see it anymore. We don't want to overbeat this mixture I should say, because that will give us quite a tough cake. And it's quite a quick process, as you saw, because already most of that flour has disappeared. So we can go in with the rest. And again, mix it until just combined. Okay, and essentially that is our cake mix made. So I'm just going to grab my spatula, scrape off the beater. And then I just like to do one final whiz around the bowl with my spatula, just to check nothing's been missed at the bottom and that there's no little pockets of flour or anything lurking inside there. But it looks good to me, and it's a beautiful colour actually, thanks to those really rich looking eggs. And then we're going to divide it equally into the 3 7-inch cake tins, which we've already greased and lined at the beginning of the video. I tend to just do that with a spoon, as you can see. But if you want to be a bit more precise, you can of course weigh yours. And then I'm just going to take a small offset spatula and just spread that mixture out so it's nice and flat and into the corners. And then we just give them a bash on the counter to just work any air bubbles up towards the surface. And then these can go into the oven at about 150 degrees fan for about 90 minutes. You'll notice that I bake mine at quite a low temperature for quite a long bake time, and that's how I ensure a nice even bake and a flat top. So I'm going to go throw these in the oven and I will see you in a little while. And there we go guys, through the power of editing we have got 3 beautifully baked, perfectly flat lemon sponges. Now I'll usually leave these to cool in the tin for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll turn them out to cool upside down on a cooling rack. So these have been cooling for a few minutes already. So I'm going to grab some cooling racks. And my technique here is literally place the cooling rack on top of the cake. You'll want to wear some oven gloves because these are going to be hot. And then slide it to the edge, literally flip it over, slide off the tin, he says. And then peel off that paper. Oh no, you didn't see that. There we go, just look at this one instead. And then usually what I will do is leave those cakes to cool for about an hour or so on the cooling racks, and then I'll wrap them up in cling film until I'm ready to use them, which is usually overnight. But before you disappear, we've got one more job to do, and that is make our buttercream. Yes, I like to make my buttercream in advance as well, simply because I find that it gives the sugar more time to dissolve into the butter and you end up with a smoother, better quality buttercream. Now today we are just going to be making a very basic, traditional buttercream using butter and icing sugar, and we're going to be making quite a lot because we're using it for the decoration as well. So I've got 500 grams of butter, and I'm going to mix that in a 2-to-1 ratio with icing sugar, so 2 parts icing sugar to 1 part butter. Mathematicians amongst you might have worked out that that means we need 1 kilogram of icing sugar. Okay, so I'm using the paddle attachment or the flexi beater attachment again, and we've switched to the 5 litre bowl simply because why not use the other bowl, because we have 2. Now we're going to start by creaming the butter as much as we can because we want it to get really, really pale. So I'm going to literally just put the mixer on at a fairly high speed and just leave it running for about 10 minutes. Can I just say I do love that whole button to turn it off thing. Love. Anyway, if I show you now what it looks like, it's gone really, really pale. So that yellow butter is now a really kind of pale off-white colour. And what we're going to do to help it on its way to being even more white is add some titanium dioxide. Now I tend to use about a teaspoon of this for every 250 grams of butter. So we obviously need 2 teaspoons, and this just helps. Need to buy some more. This just helps turn the butter even more white because we're going to be using it on the outside of the cake, so I want it to be as white as possible. And then we're going to add half of our icing sugar. So I'm sieving my icing sugar, particularly because the brand I use, which is a supermarket owned brand, has become really clumpy recently. And that's apparently because of the anti-caking agent that they use, but I would say it's definitely not as good quality as it used to be. So once upon a time, this stuff would literally just fall through the sieve. It was so soft and loose. But now, unfortunately, it's not. So we're going to sieve that first 500 or so grams through into the butter, and I am just realizing that we can't use the splash guard with this bowl because of course it sits up at the height of the 7-litre bowl. So we have to be really careful not to start the mixer on that high speed again, so don't let me forget to turn it down to minimum, otherwise this is going to go everywhere. It may well go everywhere anyway, but oh, dearie me, see what I mean? It takes ages. I mean, I've had worse bags than this one, in fairness, so maybe it's getting better again. It's not as bad as some brands have been recently, where it's literally just like a solid lump. Okay, so pop that back on the mixer. Just going to quickly whiz around the side, getting half the butter on my finger in the process. Turn it down. Throw speed slower than minimum. Don't splash, don't splash. Whew. Okay, so that first batch is all combined in, and now we're going to add the rest of our icing sugar, and we're also going to add our flavouring. Now, if I was just using this inside a cake that I was going to cover with sugar paste, I would probably use lemon zest and lemon juice because, as I mentioned earlier, did I mention earlier? I like to use real flavouring as much as possible in my cakes, but again, in an effort to keep this as pale and white as possible, we're actually going to use lemon extract today because lemon extract is clear, whereas lemon zest and lemon juice, of course, have some element of colour to them. Okay, so in a double batch like this, I'm actually going to use 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract. I'm using Nielsen Massey. Now that might sound like quite a lot, but I love lemon and I want this cake to be super, super zingy and lemony. So if that sounds like a bit too much for you, you can reduce that down to 1 tablespoon, but for me, it's going to be 2. Turn down the speed. Note to self, use the splash guard on the 7-litre bowl when making buttercream. Okay, and so, you'll notice I haven't mixed for ages and ages and ages. I know there's kind of some people who feel like for buttercream you really need to mix it for like a long, long time, but personally I prefer, once I've got all the icing sugar in, literally kind of a minute or so on a medium speed, and then I'll leave it to sit for a while, covered in cling film, and then just give it one final mix just before I use it. And for me, I find that gives me the absolute best results. And then this and the cakes will all get covered in cling film until I am ready to use them first thing in the morning. So, I'm gonna have a bit of a tidy up, might start editing some video, and then I will see you guys for the next part of making my birthday cake, which is assembling the cake and decorating it. Until then, see you in a bit. Okay guys, so it is day 2 and it is time to put this cake together. So, if you remember, yesterday we finished off with 3 lemon sponges, which I wrapped up in cling film and left overnight to completely cool. And the first thing we're going to do is torte these, which essentially means we're going to cut them in half horizontally. Now I have a very snazzy gadget to help me do that. This is my cake leveler, but you can use any type of cake leveler, whether that's a wire-based one or even just a kitchen knife. I like this one because it's really precise and means that I can't make too many mistakes. I guess we'll see. Now, normally what I would do to make these look really nice and professional is trim off the caramelization at the top and at the bottom. But today I'm just going to trim it off the top because this cake is only for me and I'm not too bothered. So my cake leveler is already set to 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is cut these 3 cakes into 1 inch slices, and then any cake cut-offs can just be kept and munched on by the household. One. 2. And then once all of our cakes have been cut into those 1 inch layers, we are going to give the buttercream another quick beat, just to get it nice and soft and loose, ready to use. And then once we've done that, the mix can go away and it is time to start assembling our cake. Now I'm going to be using a turntable to do that, and I'm going to build my cake on one of my reusable white cake boards. The reason why is because this is a buttercream cake, ideally I don't want to have to cover the cake board as well, just because it's hard to get a colour match with your buttercream and your sugar paste or your fondant icing. Of course, if you don't have boards like this, which I will link below by the way, then you can just use a normal silver board. But in which case, if you do want that nice professional finish, I would highly recommend covering the board as well. But that's up to you. To glue the cake down, first of all, I'm just going to take a tiny bit of buttercream on my small offset spatula, spread it on the centre of the board there, and that's essentially going to glue the cake to the board. Then we'll take one of the bottom pieces of the cake, place it nice and central, and give it a squeeze down. That should essentially stop it sliding around. Now I'm using a 12-inch board today, which might seem a little bit large for a 5-inch cake, but I like to put some bits and pieces around the cake as well, so I like to give myself some extra room. Plus I tend to just use 12-inch boards as default. Now because we've got 6 sponges, we are going to have 5 layers of filling in between those 6, and so what I'm going to do is do 3 with jam and 2 with just buttercream. So we'll start off with our first jam filling on here, and what I'm going to do is just put a very thin scrape of buttercream, and you'll notice my buttercream is quite thick. This is going to be a really tall cake and I want it to be as sturdy as possible. So I'm using my offset spatula to just spread this buttercream across the surface of the cake, making sure I go right up to those edges. As I say, I want this to be really thin because this is technically a jam layer, but this will stop the jam kind of soaking into the sponge so much. Then I've transferred some of my buttercream into a large piping bag. I haven't bothered putting a tip in it, I've just cut the end off, and I'm going to use that to pipe a barrier or a dam around the edge of this layer. And what that will do is just keep that jam inside and stop it coming out through the edges. Then I've got my blueberry jam, and this is just from the supermarket. I think it's Bon Maman, I can't speak French. Wild blueberry jam goes beautifully with lemon, and again I'm just going to cut the tip off. Be aware though, jam is heavier than buttercream and it will kind of just flow, so you have to be quite careful. So a nice generous amount of that filling, and then I'm just going to use the back of a spoon to spread that out to the edges of that jam. Try not to go too heavy-handed, because if you put too much jam in, it will just push its way out anyway. But that's quite a healthy amount of jam there. Then we can go on with our next layer of cake, and I like to mix and match these, so I won't use the other half of this same cake. And then just get down to the level of the cake, and just make sure it's nice and central, and push it down. Now this is something I'm sure that just I do, but before I carry on with the next layer, I'm going to scrape off some of this excess buttercream, almost like a preemptive crumb coat, just to keep things nice and tidy. And then I can use that for my next layer. This is going to be a purely buttercream layer, so I'm going to grab my piping bag again, and this time just pipe that buttercream into the centre of the cake. Grab the spatula, just neaten that up somewhat, make sure there's no pockets of air. Doing it with the piping bag just means you get a slightly more generous layer, I think, than if you were to just do it with your offset spatula. This is a really bad habit, by the way, because this is my clean buttercream, and by scraping my palette knife on there, I'm running the risk of putting crumbs into that batch. So ideally you want to have a separate bowl just for scraping. And then we're just going to repeat that process of jam layer, buttercream layer, jam layer, buttercream layer, until the whole cake is assembled. And then once we get to this stage, we're going to just give the cake a final crumb coat, which essentially means we're just going to cover the entire thing in a very thin layer of our buttercream. And what that will do is seal in any crumbs and stop them coming through to the surface when we do our final layer of buttercream in a little while. And once I get to this stage, I'm going to pop this cake in the fridge to chill, because I want this crumb coat of buttercream to really start to set up and crust over. And that will also help the stability of the cake as well, because those kind of bands of buttercream that are holding that jam in, or those dams, will also start to go a bit more solid as well. Now you might be looking at this and thinking that's a ridiculously huge cake, and you wouldn't be wrong, because that is a ridiculously huge cake, but this is very much the aesthetic of cake I enjoy making. If you're following along at home, of course, you could take it down by 2 layers or even 3 or 4. What I will say is if you ever wanted to go taller, why would you? You would need to start to think about putting some internal support within the cake. I do find that 6 1-inch layers tends to be about the limit that you can do before the weight of the whole cake starts to create problems with those bottom couple of layers. So if you did want to go even taller, what I would do is do 4 layers of cake, put in a board on top of some dowels, and then carry on building on top. But yes, 6 layers tends to be kind of where I draw the line. So I'm going to go and pop this in the fridge, and then we'll carry on. See you in a bit. Okay, so now it's time for the fun bit, and that's decorating our cake. Now, as I explained yesterday, I think, we're going to be doing a kind of watercolor buttercream finish on this cake. And so I'm going to begin by taking just a little bit of that buttercream and putting it into another bowl. Yes, it's a ridiculously huge bowl, but never mind. And then this buttercream in here will be what we use for our top coat. I don't have a huge amount left actually, so some of the cake might end up still showing through the buttercream, but I don't really mind. It's rustic, that's trendy, nearly naked cakes. It'll be fine. And in this buttercream, I'm going to add the tiniest amount of pink gel colour because I want this to be quite subtly pink. I don't want it to be too bright. So we'll just mix. So that's my pink buttercream. Okay, and so with what's left of the white, I'm just going to go over the top of that previous layer. Like so. Exactly the same way we did the crumb coat actually. But this time, what should happen is none of those crumbs should come through from underneath, giving us a nice clean finish. And then I'm going to go in with my edge scraper and just try and neaten that up slightly. Once you're kind of happy that you've got a reasonably even coat, I like to switch to a flexi smoother, and this is actually a small piece of one that I cut down myself, and then I'll use this to just go over the top, and that will just neaten everything up and give you a much smoother finish. If you find you've got any kind of hollows or little pockets where you haven't got enough buttercream, just go back in, add a tiny bit more, but don't forget we're going to be putting the pink over the top of this as well, which is why I haven't been too concerned. Then I'm going to switch to my pink buttercream, and I'm just going to take a few little kind of blobs, for want of a better phrase, and just dot them around the cake. Try and put them quite randomly, you don't want them to be too even. These are also a great way, again, to fill in any of those little pockets if you had any, hide any imperfections. And then again, just grab your scraper and start to run around the cake, smoothing that pink in. And then switching back to the flexi smoother, just again to give you that nice kind of smooth finish that we're aiming for. Again, where we've got any little kind of pockets like this, just a bit more buttercream just to fill it in. And then I'm just going to do a little bit around the top as well, which I'll then pull into the centre. Now, as I've explained in previous videos, I do tend to spend probably a bit too long neating up things like this, especially as we're going to be adding decoration that will hide most of this top edge anyway. But it's really up to you how kind of neat and tidy you want it to be. So kind of just spend as much or as little time on it as you want. But then essentially, once you are happy with how your watercoloured cake is looking, we're going to pop it back in the fridge for one final chill. Oh my goodness, can you believe I nearly forgot a step before we do the chocolate drip? And that is to add some gold splatter. To do that, I have got some Rainbow Dust Metallic Light Gold, ready to use gold paint. Now, I've also put down newspaper because this will be quite messy and I'm gonna have to really try not to get it all over everything, including cameras. Essentially, what we're going to do is take a paintbrush, dip it in the paint, and then just flick it against the cake. See if I can do it from an angle that you can see at. Like that. I promise it will look really cool. And then you've got two options really. You can either clean up the board again, or you can leave the gold splatter there. I'm gonna leave it there because I think it looks really cool. But now this can go back in the fridge for a while. We want the gold paint to kind of dry before we try and put the chocolate drip on. So that's the next job. And then again, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, and so we are on the home stretch. It is time to add all of the decorations. First thing I'm going to do is add a pink drip, and I'm going to be using chocolate drip, which I believe originally came from Australia. I'm not sure, but I know it is sold here in the UK by a few different retailers, including Cake Stuff and Zoe's Fancy Cakes. It comes in a bottle like this, and it's initially solid. You put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and then you shake it for a minute. And then when you're happy with the consistency, you essentially chop the top off the bottle, and there's different markers there to give you different thicknesses of drips. Now the few times I've used this, I've always gone for the thinner one, but I think I want quite a thick drip today. Squish this beyond all recognition, but never mind. And then essentially what you do is you go around the top edge of the cake and allow it to drip down. It's really important that the cake is nice and cold so that the chocolate starts to kind of almost firm up straight away. You only really get one shot at this, so I'm thinking I'm only going to do a partial drip, but I may well change my mind depending on how it looks, because if it looks terrible, I'll put that at the back. Here we go. I'm going to try and do it so you can see what I'm doing, which could end horribly. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Stop, I want this one to stop. I think he's going to make contact with the board, but never mind. And then I'm just going to put an extra little bit at the top here, just to kind of bring it all together. And then the plan is very much that it's almost like half and half. So then I'm going to build up the rest of my decoration on this side using that chocolate to stick everything in place. So I kind of need to move fast. Now, I don't know if I mentioned earlier on in the video because it has been like a whole day, but I want to use macaron on my cake. But rather than make them myself this time, you know, figured we're already in isolation and having to get some ingredients, I would get some online, and I found this place, Macarons and More by Tim Kinnard. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong, Tim. But this is essentially a bakery that makes macaron amongst other things and then also ships them through the post, offering overnight delivery. So I've not tried these before, but we're going to give them a go, and I'm going to put them on the cake first because I want to do it while this is still wet. So as I say, if I put that at the front, we're going to use these as our kind of main bit of decoration. Now this chocolate does dry really quickly, which is why, as I say, I'm going to move quite fast. And apologies, I'm doing it facing me, but I kind of need to see what I'm doing. And I'm going to intersperse those with what's left of my buttercream. So I've put the rest of it into a piping bag and I've fitted that with an open star tip. Okay, so I've just piped some little piped bits of pink and also some mini rosettes, and using literally, we're down to the, you know, there's nothing in here. I'm just going to use some of this buttercream to add some more macaron to the base. Remember I said earlier I do like to make use of the base as well. So I'm going to pop one kind of down here, actually onto the board itself, and then this one here up against the side of the cake. In fact, we'll put a couple on the board. Yum. So I went for rose flavour, mainly for the colour, and I chose a set of 12 pick your own, but obviously I chose all the same so they would match, but you can also choose from a whole host of different flavours and add what you want to the cake. I'm now going to wash my hands because I've just eaten. And then we're going to add some sprinkles as well, and so I've got some rose gold blush sprinkles from Dr. Oetker, which were just from the supermarket. So we're going to sprinkle some of those amongst this buttercream part over here. And that chocolate's kind of almost set already, so it does set pretty quickly. So that's something to be aware of. And of course the buttercream is pretty much set as well because we put it in the fridge before we added the drip. So things aren't going to stick perhaps as well as they might if everything was still soft. But never mind. Okay, and then mixed in with these sprinkles, I also want to add some of these giant rods that were in the subscription box that we checked out in my top 10 gift ideas video. So I'm just going to dot some of the white ones in amongst everything else as well. Still loving the test tube, by the way. If you want to know more about the sprinkle subscription, you can check out my top 10 gift ideas video. I'll put a link up in the corner. Might see if I can push some of these into the side as well. Oh, actually we've got gold ones too. I know they're not quite the same gold, but well, let's just throw some of those on. Why not? This is definitely not going to be a subtle cake. It's very much throwing everything at it and the kitchen sink. 2 different shades of gold, if not more. Okay, and then I'm going to mix some of these little bits from the sprinkles at the top in amongst those as well, if I can keep hold of them, because apparently not. Yes, this is kind of the ridiculous level of time I spend on finishing touches. Obviously you don't have to, and if you're not doing the drip, you can do this while the buttercream is still really soft, in which case you can essentially just throw sprinkles at the cake and they should almost stick that easily. And then the last thing we're going to add is something else I picked up from Amazon. In fact, it was a pack of kind of budget cake toppers. So these were £7 for 8 plastic acrylic cake toppers, all in gold. Some of them are a bit not great, and obviously the quality is what you'd expect for £7 for 8 toppers, but for a cake just to enjoy at home, I figured, you know, you can't go wrong. So I'm just gonna, I mean it's really flexible, but I'm just going to, if we find the front, slide this in kind of over here. Is that finished? Are we happy? I feel like you see my too much gene is kicking in, but I do think, you know, much as I wish I was that person who just has sugar flowers ready to go, I'm afraid I don't think I am actually that person. But there you go guys, that's the back. But there you go guys, there is my birthday cake 2021. Definitely a birthday to remember. So just to recap, in there we have got our 6 layers of delicious lemon sponge cake. Those have been sandwiched together with lemon buttercream and a delicious blueberry jam from the supermarket. We then crumb coated the whole thing and then did a top coat of our buttercream before going in with a bit of pink to do the watercolor effect. We then splattered that with the Rainbow Dust gold paint before applying a chocolate drip from Chocolate Drip. And then that's been topped with the macaron from Macarons and More by Tim Kennard. We've got some buttercream piping on the top here. We've got a few different types of sprinkles, and I have to say I'm really thrilled with how it came out. There is of course just one more finishing touch that it needs. Ta-da! Do they even show up remotely in this light at all? But anyway, there we go. It wouldn't be a birthday cake without some candles, so feel free to join in. I wonder if I can find some music to play over the top, because I'm not going to sing happy birthday to myself. I think that might be just a new level of lockdown/isolation sadness. But as I say, this cake is just for us to enjoy at home, so I am going to blow out my candles. But just before I do, if it's your first time here, thank you so much for joining us today. Do make sure you hit that big red subscribe button before you go. If you are already subscribed and would like to get a notification every time I upload a new video, you can of course ring the bell icon. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up as always. I do hope you're staying safe and well out there, and I will see you at the same time next week for another video. Until then, take care guys, and happy caking.